Welcome to Inadequate Mother, and I'm here in a studio again. I do a mixture of online, solo and in-studio podcasts where we discuss random topics connected to how we might feel inadequate and how society kind of really shapes us to not feel as confident as we should do when it comes to mothering and navigating life. So today I have an incredible guest that I'm really, really thrilled to be here chatting to. She's a mum and she is epic in the sense of she's sharing her journey of raising a beautiful deaf daughter, 2 daughters, but we'll get into her story and who she is and what she's about. But I found her on social media, which is where I do a lot of my sharing, on Instagram. Her Instagram is called Learning Ada's Language, and she is learning sign language, which is obviously what I'm massively interested in. And I got the pleasure of interpreting for Ada at a theatre production, and I was just blown away by her interaction with this performance and just being able to be there in that moment and interpret that and navigate the best way to give access to this really young child, but then also connect with Tilly Hawkes, which is her mum, and just go through her content and just see the message that she's giving to the world. And I can't applaud her enough for just standing up and saying, you're not going to change my daughter, I'm going to change the world and how the world perceives my daughter. And I love that, Tilly. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
That was like I was trying my best to do like the best introduction I could. I'm new to this podcasting world, but this kind of conversation is obviously really important, and it clearly is what people want to know about, because your content goes so viral and people don't just look at it because it's entertaining or whatever. It's people are engaging with you, asking you questions and things like that. So let's start from the beginning, and you know, when you found out that Ada was deaf, like, what was your connection to sign language? Was there any?
No, nothing. I'd met one deaf person before in my life, when I was working at a university, and I was working in student support, and there was one deaf student who needed special provisions, but she was, I remember, very oral. She had cochlear implants. I didn't see her sign ever, not to say she didn't, but I remember having a conversation with her once and thinking, oh, well, how do I communicate with her? And why does she need these special provisions? Because she's communicating so easily, but never getting any further than that with her. And then, 9-10 years later, I had Ada. Okay. And it's funny now, looking back to my interactions with that young woman, I think, oh, that's why. And this is what I should have done. And when I had Ada, I had zero knowledge of what it meant to be deaf, zero knowledge of sign language.
How did you feel when you were told? When were you told? In the hospital at birth, or?
So she didn't pass her newborn hearing screening, but there were other complications at birth. So we knew that she may not be 100% healthy. And then we were in for 5 days because they had to monitor Ada's platelets. They discharged us and we had to come back in a couple of days later. So she was 8 days old when we came back in for the second screening. And we had a call from the paediatrician, and she asked us to go down and see her on that same day. And she, again, inconclusive result with the screening. So I had the usual spiel of, oh, it might be fluid, it might be this, it might be that, it might be deafness. They did say that. And then we went down to see the paediatrician, and I told her this, and she gave me this look, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was like, she was like, I know why she's deaf. And then she told me that Ada had a virus called CMV, and that she contracted it while I was pregnant. I had no idea that I was poorly. But this virus can it can do anything to a unborn or newborn baby. So, you know, I was sat there told, yes, she probably is deaf. Also, she may never eat independently. She may never walk. She may.
They told you this in the first appointment.
I mean, not with words like that.
I was going to say.
My questions were, well, will this happen? Will this happen? Don't know.
Oh, wow.
So it was, that diagnosis was just really overwhelming to have no idea. There's very little research around CMV. The doctor could tell me very little. She directed me to a website. That was the best she could really do.
Really?
So for me, Ada's deafness at that point was so linked to the CMV diagnosis that it felt utterly terrifying. And I think I would have felt terrified anyway. But then when we were back in, I think it was the following week, and she was properly diagnosed with deafness, it felt like this... It felt like a really bad sign that more was to come and that she was this really poorly baby, and it was just all
it was very focused around the medical illness element, because yes, she's deaf, but she could also be X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And there's all these implications of this virus.
Yeah.
And you hear virus and you think,
And I mean, you know, there's a lot of nuance around the term hearing loss, and I fully support the whole idea of deaf gain, and now that's exactly how I see it. Ada's gained so much from being deaf. But for her, when she was developing, her hearing was developing like a typical hearing person, and then the virus attacked her while she was developing and damaged the little hairs in her cochlea. So she did lose hearing in the womb, but the way that she specifically developed, I saw it, she was attacked by this horrible thing that I couldn't see. So it did feel like, you know, this tiny, precious little baby that you have and you just want to protect. And then I looked back to my time in pregnancy thinking, oh, well, she's protected from everything. And unbeknownst to me, she was being hurt.
How did that make you feel as a mother, and as, you know, because I know we're so physically and mentally, emotionally connected to our children. How did it make you feel?
There's a lot of guilt, and a lot of CMV mums will say the same, that had I done a couple of things differently. I hyper-focused on the fact that I potty trained my older daughter while I was pregnant, because it tends to be from children that you catch CMV through the exchange of fluids. So I just thought, oh, well, it must have been when I was potty training Lila. It must have been perhaps when I, didn't clean an accident up properly.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up we gave up on the potty training because she wasn't ready. So I just thought, why did I bother doing that? Why did I put myself through all of that?
Yeah. But in all honesty, what mother who has a child doesn't potty train their child with their child that, who's pregnant? It doesn't, I don't think I've ever heard of a mother saying, I'm pregnant, I can't potty train.
No. There's so little information about CMV out there. When you're pregnant and you're given all this information, you get loads of information about what cheeses you should eat, and what meats you can and can't eat, how to handle a cat if you've got one in the home. All of those things are way less problematic compared with CMV. The occurrence is way lower, but parents aren't told about simple ways to avoid CMV.
Really?
So I as time went on, I started to feel quite angry about that as well, because had I known, I would have done certain things differently. So there's a lot of regret, a lot of anger, but the guilt was definitely the biggest one, feeling like it was my fault that my child was poorly.
Okay. How is she now? Is she, in terms of her, she's deaf, but she's healthy? Has she had any health problems?
She's had like little blips. So like I always say, she's on the slow side of average. So her development was slow. I think because her balance wasn't good. I'm pretty sure that was because of the CMV. So, walking was a big milestone. But then that milestone, when she walked, those first steps were like, so much bigger and so much better. So like it comes with this incredible joy as well. All these milestones that she has met and is continuing to meet are incredible. And she seems to be doing well. She had a few digestive issues when she was smaller. But we think the deafness is definitely the primary outcome of the CMV. She may possibly be neurodivergent, which is linked to CMV as well. But both of those things, for me now, they're just things that make up the wonderful child that is Ada. And I wouldn't take either of those things away from her. So I have this weird relationship with the virus now where I hate it because it's an evil little thing, and some children are really negatively impacted.
Really?
You know, their quality of life is just completely taken off them because of the virus, and some children very sadly don't even survive. But for me, the outcome has been this wonderful little girl and a deaf child, which I would never change. So I'm oddly, it feels weird to say it, and I don't want to diminish the kind of the horrible nature of the virus, but I'm oddly thankful to it because it's giving me a child.
I never forget when I first went to university. I randomly went. It's like I just woke up one day and just walked into uni and said, make me an interpreter. And I remember the lecturer, and I had no idea that some of the modules were about history, culture, campaigning for rights, societal, conversations. And I was like, oh, this is a bit of me. And I never forget the lecturer said something along the lines of, some deaf families will hope that their child is deaf. And I was just flabbergasted. I stood there going, I was so shocked. And I was like, how on earth can that be? Like, that's so awful.
Yeah.
And now, like, obviously, 10 years down the line, or however many years, it's way more than that, I can't think, but I'm like, of course you would want your child to be deaf. Like, it's so mad that I would have that initial reaction to the reaction now where I completely 100% know that if I was deaf, I would want my child to be deaf.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that we can't say enough, but people really need to feel it to know that, to have that different reaction.
100% agree. Yeah.
And it's made me like conversations like this where you might get that reaction from someone and they're never really going to change that reaction until they have a connection with the deaf community. And I don't know if we can change it, but yeah.
I think it's awareness, isn't it?
When did you start becoming aware? So like when you realised Ada was going to be deaf, what did you do? Because I'd just start Googling shit. I would just start Googling. Did you start Googling
I tried really hard not to because the consultant said don't do it.
Were you Googling CMV or were you just Googling deafness?
CMV. That was such a focus for me.
But when did you start?
When I actually started engaging with the deafness was a good 18 months later. I mean, we had a TOD assigned within like a week. So she sort of functioned very similarly to a health visitor at the time. We had regular visits with her. Looking back, there are lots of things that I would, knowing what I know now, change about those interactions. But Ada's deafness at that point was diagnosed as mild to moderate. So we thought one ear was mild and one ear was moderate. So there was a really kind of, from the professionals, a really relaxed kind of, oh yeah, she'll access speech fine, not a big deal, nothing to really worry about, just focus on speech input, and I'm a chatterbox anyway. She had her hearing aids, which were a huge battle. And with the context of knowing now that actually she was profoundly deaf at that point, now I understand why the hearing aids were such a battle. They are with all babies, but with Ada it was just impossible because they were giving her nothing. They were just these things in her ear because they were set incorrectly, because the diagnosis was incorrect. They were just, it was stuff in her ear that was giving her absolutely nothing.
Right.
But my perspective at the time was I was very submissive to the professionals that, they're the experts. I will just, respect them, and they're telling me that just talk, and everything will be fine. And I remember being scared that she might have to go to a deaf school. I remember being scared of all these perceptions I had of what it meant to be deaf. I was just like, oh, well, she'll be fine if I just talk to her, so I'll just do that. And I think, again, because it was so linked with the CMV just, it overshadowed everything. You know, daily life was just dominated by it. We were in the hospital all the time, blood
Really?
tests all the time.
Yeah.
So the deafness at that point was really secondary.
Yeah, because you were just worried about her health
Yeah.
and her surviving.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life was, I just wanted to make sure that, you know, she was going to eat properly, and that we were going to, like, gross motor and all of that sort of stuff. That really overshadowed everything. And I think because it was presented to me as this thing that we fixed with hearing aids, and because at the time I was very submissive, I didn't tap into it. I think also I didn't fully accept her deafness until we had the proper diagnosis of profound. And I remember at that point, she was 18 months old. I grieved. I went through like a grieving process when she was born because of the CMV. And then when she was diagnosed as profoundly deaf, I grieved again. I went through the whole, like, you know, anger and all of that.
What do you think that grieving was? What is it you were grieving? Having a child that wasn't similar to you and wasn't experiencing the world the way you were? Was it that?
It's really hard to pin down. I think it was the life that I imagined for her.
Yeah.
And what I thought a good life and a normal life should be, based on my personal experiences, adjusting to the fact that she's going to have these barriers and she's not going to experience this in the same way that I have. And your initial emotional response of, well, that therefore means it's bad. If, you know, if she can't access music the way I can access music, that it's bad. Not, it's just different. But there's a real kind of learning journey and a processing journey and an experience journey that I think comes with understanding that different experiences aren't necessarily worse, they're just different. So I think I was sad for her. I was sad for what I thought that she had lost. I think that's really what it was. And again, because of this CMV, because it was so negative, it's a loss. It felt like it felt like an attack and all of this. It just felt really, really sad. But it was then, I'm trying to think. We asked when Ada was born, should we learn sign language right from the get-go? And we were told no, Makaton.
Really?
Yeah.
Say what?
I know.
Who told you?
The teacher
Mr.
of the
Tumbles.
deaf.
Mr. Tumble language. No, sorry. So just to clarify for anyone that's listening and isn't aware, Makaton is a wonderful language created that helps people with learning difficulties communicate in a simpler form, who maybe aren't verbal and need things broken down in a visual way. But it is by no means a grammatical, linguistic, legally recognised, I can become a badass doctor, learn sign language. It's not a British sign language. It is a aid.
Yeah, it's a learning aid, isn't it? It's not a full language.
No, it's a gestural.
But I think that was
aid.
the perspective at the time, is that, well, she'll learn English. That's what's important. So just chuck a few signs in and that'll help. Not, yes, she needs full accessible language from the get-go. I think the problem with Mr. Tumble really is that it's not clear what he's using. It just says sign language.
Oh, does it?
If you have to really kind of dig into like the description of the program or whatever, and then it says like right at the bottom it's Makaton, but it's sort of hidden away. Really, I think it should be included in the titles that we are using Makaton. Because I think really the target audience isn't deaf children. No. You know, those aren't the children that he brings on the show. He's not claiming.
You were directed to it.
That's So I don't think it's so much the program itself. I think it's what people think it is that's the problem. So I think there should be clarity around what they're using and why. And
that clarity maybe needs to start with the professionals.
Yep. Yeah, there needs to be. I mean, the TOD team, has changed now, and their perspective is different and much better. But
so how many years ago is this? Let's go back.
This would have been Ada's 6, so just over 6 years ago.
6. It's hard to imagine, isn't it, how much can change in such a short space of time, and how much cannot change. Because for anybody that's listening as well, just to get some perspective and insight, in I think it's 1880, there was a famous conference in Milan that basically banished sign language and said that everyone had to be oral, learn to speak, learn to lip read, and all their education, instead of learning history, maths, was learning how to speaking into a balloon. And, you know, they weren't educated, they were just trying to make hearing.
Very invasive strategies as well, weren't they?
Yeah, and that was in 1880, and it only got took down and kind of abolished, I think, in 2010.
It's insane,
2010.
isn't it? Yeah.
So that's how it's been. So people see sign language everywhere now, but they actually really don't see the impacts of very recent situations. And when I'm an interpreter, I do go out to these appointments, and I mix with that community, those elderly people that are just like amazed that someone's signing, because they had to do it in secret, and people don't realise that. And I think with the professionals, maybe there needs to be a bit of a hurry to catch up.
Yeah. There's the concept now that BSL is good, and a much better understanding that Makaton is not appropriate, that's for sure. But then what that looks like, that's the next step. How they provide it, how they give it to parents and make sure parents are aware that it's, I mean, my perspective is that it's not an option. It shouldn't be a choice. I think all deaf children have a right to it. And I think that if parents are given it in the same way that they're given speech therapy, I certainly wouldn't have questioned it. You know, oh, your child's deaf, here, have some speech therapy, here, let's get you on a BSL level 1 course. I've been like, great, let's go.
How did you get on a BSL course?
So it was through Instagram. Everything I know is through Instagram. So so when I got Ada's diagnosis of profound deafness, that was then it was like, right, okay, I need to change my kind of everything. I need to start learning properly now. It's like, oh, she's full deaf. I need to do you know what I mean? It felt different.
One of the things that I just can't get, I'm just so proud of you as a person, and I can relate to so much, is because you are basically saying, I don't have this community, I don't have this insight, I am inadequate in this area.
Yeah.
I need to, no one who should be telling me is telling me, so I'm just going to look for myself.
Yeah.
And you've gone to social media in very much the same way as I did, because I didn't have connection with the deaf community, and it was a hard battle to qualify, because if you don't use your language, you lose it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And deaf clubs have closed, community environments are not easy. So social media for me was a massive way of connecting, and you've done the same thing.
It opened
for
my
your
world
child.
up. Yeah, absolutely. And I was able to learn from, I wasn't just restricted to the professionals who were given to me because I happened to live in a certain area. I found audiologists, speech therapists, people using sign language, what else? Teachers of the deaf, you name it, any service that's linked with having a deaf child. There's loads on Instagram, and I found them. But the biggest one was the deaf community, finding deaf adults and learning from their experiences. That was when I was like, oh yeah, obviously she needs sign language. Obviously we need to be giving that to her. So their experiences, but also, people all across the world were, have reached out to me. This little old me, this parent who happens to be asking the right questions, they've seen that and they've offered support, and I've learnt so much. And I think, like you say, acknowledging that you need to be educated, acknowledging that there are gaps in your understanding, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how you improve, and that's how you learn, and that's how I've become the mother that I need to be for Ada. And the mother, I've said this before, the mother that I wish that I was right from the get-go. But I was so ill-informed, and I was not proactive. That was something I needed to learn as well. I needed to learn how to trust my own gut, and kind of stand up to professionals who I might not necessarily agree with, but at the time I didn't know I didn't agree with them because I hadn't tapped into this part of me.
You had a feeling.
It was like I just hadn't it was like I'd been sort of in this little limbo for 18 months. And then I snapped out of it and I was like, right, let's go. And the amount that I've learnt all through Instagram it's been life-changing, and it's allowed me to give Ada what I know she needs: sign language, deaf education, access to her community, pride in her identity, all of these things. Those are things that I have been taught and I wanted to be taught. How on earth would I have known otherwise?
Community.
Exactly.
Community is where we are left feeling inadequate. We were not meant to do any of it on our own. I speak as a solo parent, single parent, whatever you want to call me. But I see my friends that are married. They shouldn't have to do all these things alone. We shouldn't have to live in a society that has such little community. And unfortunately, community does now exist in a digital form. And I just commend you for just putting yourself out there, because there will be a lot of people that think badly of social media or opening your... Have you had any negative comments or...
Yeah, I mean, in the part, only very recently has negativity come my way, because my account is little. But then with the Halloween...
It's not little. I'd just like to just point out that your videos are so high engaged, and have such a good share comments, the amount of comments and questions.
Yeah.
Now that it's not about the following, it's about how many people need to and are hungry for the questions that you're putting out there, and the insight that you're putting out there, and the conversation is existing in your little Instagram, but it's massive.
Yeah, that's been... is it recent? I think it's reached a wider audience more recently. So up until, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago, I was in like a little bubble of only really being linked with people who were linked with the deaf community. So everything that I was putting out there was always received very positively, and it allowed me to develop connections and learn from other parents and all of that. But since we did an advert linked with Cadbury Fingers, it's definitely got bigger, and it's reaching a wider audience. And it's...
Did you get negativity from that? Was it? Yeah.
That was shared quite far and wide, actually. So a few big accounts reshared on there, so that reached millions, that advert did. And overwhelmingly it was positive, but it was the first time I ever really came across negativity. Things like, "Oh, your kid's deaf, just get over it. She can't hear, just deal with it." And I was like, well, I am. This is exactly what the whole thing is about.
Thanks for your input.
Goodbye. But it's I don't know, odd comments like that. Some Helen Keller comments came my way, which they made me feel a bit sick. Dress her up as Helen Keller for Halloween. I know. Also, what I've started trying to do, I mean, there are some comments that just are not worth engaging with, and you can kind of see that from the tone that they're going to just be a very unconstructive conversation. However, there are others on a couple of my more recent posts, which has been about interpreter access for Ada. Okay. So the first one was about her not having an interpreter at A&E.
I saw that. Yeah, it was interesting.
That got massive engagement. That's the first I would call viral post I ever had.
Oh, really?
That hit 1 million. And
because she showed Ada in
yes.
I think that's why I saw it, because I was like, oh my God, what's happened to Ada?
Yeah, I think that was what it was. And when I used that photo of her with, cuts all over her face, I didn't think much of it, but I think that is what has caught people's attention. And I just talked about the fact that what the service that should have been provided to her, that is set up by that hospital, didn't work. And there was also a little bit of low awareness in terms of the staff and how they should communicate with Ada. They very much talked to me, and I had to interpret for Ada, and it was like, right, Mum, can you explain to her this? Mum, can you tell her that?
So that still happens with grown-ass adults, with me as an interpreter. Can you tell him? And
no,
it's
you
like,
tell him. Yeah.
I'm just,
But, I mean, I wasn't angry, because I know that, I say I know, I think we're going to be the first first patients that asked for this service, especially in paediatric A&E. So the fact that there were, things that went wrong, you sort of expect it. And I've had conversations since then, and things are improving. But the level of negativity from some people was quite shocking. Real defensiveness from people. Certain people who worked in the medical field were like, well, how can you expect nurses to be fluent in BSL? Well, I'm not expecting that. I'm just expecting services to be deaf aware. I never asked for the nurses to be full BSL. I'm just asking for better education for those members of staff who would want that education as well, to know to talk directly to Ada, even though I'm the one that's signing. And why on earth would you expect a BSL interpreter for your kid when you're there? You're taking a service from somebody else. But
as in, there's not enough interpreters.
Yeah.
Ada doesn't need it as much as somebody else. So, yeah.
But
if as interpreters, if we're booked and we're free, we're free.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't think it really...
I mean, I don't really know why a young child's need is any different from an adult's. Arguably, it's higher because there are safeguarding implications as well with, a child not being able to communicate directly with the nurse. I just think deaf children deserve exactly the same access as hearing children. So it was astounding to me that anybody would question that. But I think also it showed a lack of understanding of what my role is and what my level of signing is as well, because there was a lot of commenting around why we would need the interpreter because I was there and because I can sign. But what I tried to do was, when those comments came up, I tried to address them. And I didn't go in aggressively. I just said, well, this is why. And I explained. And 9 times out of 10, the person who commented would come back and go, oh, right, great, thank you. That answers my question. Move on. So I've tried to turn the negative into a positive and see it as like
and that's what it
an
is,
awareness opportunity. But it's hard. It's very hard not to just get defensive straight away because it does feel like an attack, doesn't it, when those things come up. So every time I was like, right, I'm going to give it 24 hours. I'm going to think about how I'll respond.
Brilliant.
And then I'll respond. But it's not an aspect that I relish, especially because it's about my kid. If it was directed to me, if, my account was about me and my personal life, like, I wouldn't like it, but I think I'd be able to swallow it better. But when, Mama Bear comes out, when it's about my daughter and questioning her needs and
questioning your adequacy as a parent, which makes us uncomfortable straight away whenever someone questions anything to do with your choices as a parent.
And the thing is, you talk about adequacy there. What I was trying to say in that post is that I am not adequate for Ada's needs there. And people are even angry at me for saying I'm not good enough. You can't win sometimes.
Honestly, I just wish the world would realise that nothing really, and I was talking to Andy Palmer, who I really want to introduce you to. He's a child of deaf parents, so he's a coder. He was a deaf son, and he has a deaf son, and he's 23 years down the line now, has so much insight, and we need to sit down because you would just be able to pick his brains apart.
Love that.
But anyway, he was saying how there's just no need, nothing really comes from being right all the time. There's no, you don't have to be right, we just have to be teachable, and I love that you have done that, and you've said, I need that. And when you when people put posts up on social media, that's ultimately sometimes what they're doing. They're just saying, I'm opening myself up, I'm being vulnerable. What do we get from that? But obviously the nature of social media, you will stick to that negative. And I remember doing it with me and then having to go through this learning journey of actually, I'm developing a level of resilience here and I'm learning.
Yeah.
And I'm getting this feedback and I need to respond better. And every single year I would get better at it. And you will. And like I said, it's just about connecting with the community. It's not about you trying to go viral. No, not at all.
It's, the reasons for sharing my journey of Ada have changed over the years. Initially was to try and connect with people in our church community, actually, and to try and teach them about our experiences so that when Ada got old enough to go out and socialise, she wouldn't have to be advocating for herself all the time because they'd already know. That was kind of my main aim initially. And then over time, it's warped into something so different because of because of how I've engaged with other parents of deaf children, I think, and how I've engaged with deaf adults, and what I've realised is that there's nobody advocating for sign language as a primary language, really, in the hearing parent area, because very few parents have a sign language only using child if they're hearing. But I really am one of a handful that I'm aware of. Most deaf children are raised either oral or bilingually. We're trying to do bilingual with Ada, but I want to show Ada as a success story for who she is now and for what she's achieving through sign, through deaf education, that as a positive example. Because I think that's what I was missing really right at the start, was a role model for me and a kind of an example of a thriving child, full deaf, you know, BSL, deaf community, deaf with a capital D, seeing that as like, oh, this could be great, rather than like, oh, we need to avoid that. We need to get into mainstream education. We need to, you know, focus on speech. And, you know, neither of those things are wrong, but there's an imbalance in the examples that are available to hearing parents.
And you can find them or there might not be many, but hopefully there'll be more, and where you'll find them will be more or less social media and stuff. I think I definitely meet, you know, your big D's, your little D. Try not to like use that word big D, little D anymore, because it's becoming not very PC, and I completely agree. But I would say look in the art sector, because for me as an interpreter who meets so many different deaf people that have experienced language in so many different ways, I think people that have progressed as like actors and dancers and performers, they always seem to have it's that richness that lives within the full BSL and not the SSE that kind of allows that creativity to grow. And as a mum who's watched, you know, 2 daughters grow, and I remember sitting on a plane and someone said to me, do let your kids learn the things that computers can't do, because AI is going to take over. And I remember years ago thinking this and just being like, AI, what's that? And now I can see it, and I'm like, okay, creativity skills, those things. And, you know, watching Ada look at that theatre production and seeing her like with that movements, and she is BSL, she is very BSL, and you can see that. And yeah, you can just, when you talk about examples of like positive examples of BSL, strong BSL people, the Arts Council, they do, I do get to work with these incredible deaf performers, and I would say that that's where I really see it, because you can see this strong identity and force, and
the language is part of them. I feel that with Ada, it's very much a part of her. What I wish there was more example of is the academic field, really showing that, you know, that you can achieve whatever you want. Because for me, I value education really highly because I think it opens doors. And what I want for Ada is that she can do whatever she wants. So if I can make sure that her education is as good as possible, then that preserves her choice to then go down whatever route. We do think she's bright, and I want her to feel like she can go to university to be a vet if she wants. She loves animals. She's got a very caring nature. That's what she really hones in on all the time, is animals and babies. So maybe she'll be a midwife, I don't know. But I don't ever want her to feel like, oh, well, I can't do that because I don't speak or listen. But there's not that many examples. I'm finding them now. But when Ada was first born, I wasn't given any examples of, look at this person who's, you know, like Chris Lang, who's making massive waves in the architecture field. I was, you know, never shown anyone like him. Or is it Justine Durno, who is a doctor achieving, again, massive things in her field. All these different things that deaf people can do. Yeah. Hearing parents need to see that right from the word go. But that those role models, they're just they're not as accessible as they should be, and they're
They're
not
out
celebrated.
there, but it's, I mean, I meet them all the time when I get booked. I'm like, oh, who's this? Oh, a psychologist. Wow.
Yeah.
And I want to go to them, you know.
Yeah.
It's social, but sometimes it's a lot of pressure to put on, I think, to
it's the
expect
visibility,
someone,
isn't it? Yeah. I
So
think you're right there. It's a lot to take on, rather than just, you know, excelling in your field and getting on with your own life, then to have to say like, hi, look at me and look at what I can do.
Yeah,
but
be
also,
a role model.
Yeah.
A big
It
thing,
is a lot to take on. But I'm so grateful to the people that have and that do, because that's what helps me know how to raise Ada, and it helps me to understand what barriers she might come up against if she goes down this trajectory in her life. I can be like, right, well, how can we plan for that, and how can we try and remove those, you know, as easily as possible, or overcome them as easily as possible. I think
it's access to the resources and the qualifications that are fundamentally the hardest, because I work in a lot of universities. Universities at the moment tend to just say, as long as we've got an interpreter, there we go, it's done. And I'm like, okay, she's doing a dissertation and it's about research, and she has to go out and ask people and research and communicate and engage. There's so many extra barriers, but like you said, when you said Ada walking was just such a joy, her qualification, whatever it is, will be worth so much more, because she's overcome those barriers, and those, like I said about the creative skills, the things that computers can't do, overcoming a barrier and working your way through a world that isn't fit for you is skilling you up in a way that you just carry so much gift, and it's our stupidity that we don't access that gift. And people always ask me, why did I learn or get into this field? And I always remember having this thought, because I was quite religious as well. I went to church. My dad was a born-again Christian. So I was always asking those questions. Well, how come these bad things happen?
Yeah.
This isn't fair. How can God allow this to happen? He can't be real. And then I had this random thought. What if God has sent a cure for cancer, or a cure for evil, or, you know, all the problems in the world? They're just in the mind and the heart of a deaf person, and it's us dum-dums that haven't been able to access it.
Society puts things in its own way, doesn't it?
Yeah. I remember having that thought and then thinking, well, yeah, it's our fault.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. This amazing community that I didn't even know existed, but now, you know, because of Ada, it's expanded my mind in a way that I never knew was possible. Like, I've realised how much I didn't know, and how much I still don't know.
How you learn? Because as a dyslexic person, when I learnt sign language, I realised I'm dyslexic, and I learnt how I learn, because I'm a visual thinker. So how has it improved and expanded your mind? Like, what is it? How has it helped you as a hearing person? Because I'm all for talking about how sign language should be taught in hearing schools as a GCSE and benefits us as hearing people. How has it benefited you?
So I think for me, it's about experience. I've learned through experience and connections, and that broadening your world broadens your mind. So understanding different perspectives, understanding, you know, different experiences, that's what's broadened my mind and helped me to realise how much I don't know, and therefore how much I want to know, and what I want to know and where I want to go with my life. Before I had Ada, I had no real kind of career trajectory. I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I wouldn't say that I know now, but I do know that I want to work with the deaf community. How that looks in a few years' time, I'm not sure, but I love working in deaf education. That's something I never thought I'd hear myself say, but that's what brings me joy. So I find that the more I experience, the more people I meet, the more aware I am of, I think that's it. It's learning that I actually know nothing. Do you know what
You're
I
inadequate.
mean? Like, well, yeah.
I think, we all just need to know that we're inadequate.
Yeah. And
but it sounds to me like it's not necessarily the language. It's connecting with people that experience different lives to you, and in a sensory way.
Yeah.
So they take in the world through different senses. Therefore, it heightens your senses, having an understanding of their senses.
Exactly.
And that's how we should connect. And gifts, they come in all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and that's it as well. Connection, that's what's important. Like, that's all I wanted with my daughter. And
can I ask you, did you have to pay for your... So let's talk about that, because that pisses me off.
You and me both. Yeah.
That pisses me off, that deaf people have to pay
to learn their own language.
Sign language.
I know, it's ridiculous. It drives me mad because it makes it that much more inaccessible. It's another barrier.
Yeah,
But I mean, we basically had to strategize learning because we didn't have the funds to pay for both my husband and for me to learn. So we started me off, got me up to level 3, and then we're like, right, okay, that's kind of, it's not enough, but it's an acceptable level for me to be able to communicate with Ada. Let's now start Sam on his level 1. So Sam had to wait for years to start his formal learning, and he made that sacrifice because he was the one going out to work and I was a stay-at-home mum at the time. So we decided, right, Tilly's a primary carer. She's the one that is going to be communicating with Ada the most. Let's do that. Then we'll get Sam in later on. And now we're able to get our daughter doing her level 1 as well. But we've had to stagger it because at the time we couldn't afford for anyone other than me to be learning. And then the knock-on effect of that is that Ada's relationships with her family aren't equal. She's had easier communication with her mother than she has with her father, and she and her dad do brilliantly. And obviously I've tried to teach Sam as much as I can as I go. So he's gone into level 1 a much better signer already than I was when I started. So it's not like he's just not communicated with Ada for years, but he has made a sacrifice there. And Ada's life as a part of a family has been impacted because of finance, because we couldn't afford for us all to learn straight away. And that makes me cross. It makes me cross that it's something that we had to think about. We had to strategize our daughter's access to her own family. We had to strategize a parent's connection with their own child. When you look at it that way, I think it makes it feels inhumane that money is a factor.
It's not the same everywhere. I know in Sweden and there's other places in the world that it's automatic and you will actually get paid leave from work.
Oh, don't.
So, I'm not telling you to go move to Sweden or somewhere, but it is really, really frustrating. It's like the government messed up, banned it, made it this bad thing that shouldn't happen, and then it said sorry, we've made a mistake, 2010.
But we're not going to do anything about
it. What are you going to do with that sorry? You're going to put your money where your mouth is.
And the amount of money that they have spent on giving Ada cochlear implants, that wasn't a battle. The amount of money that they spent on speech therapy, I didn't have to push for that at all. It was just given to me. Teachers of the deaf, that costs money. All of these resources that the government have poured money into to try and make my child hear and speak, yet they can't. Comparatively, BSL courses are nothing compared to all of that. Yet that we have to fight for, and that's the thing that they need the most, deaf children. It's unfathomable.
Bizarre. I'm sat here I've got goose pimples because everything you're saying is incredible. And it's crazy that there's not more of these conversations happening in social media and I'm yet to hear these experiences so just kudos to you, babe, for speaking up and saying this isn't good enough. And this needs to change. And I think you called your account a small little account. And again, mine's very small. It's not and I'm not doing anything. I was just being me. I was, there was no real intentional aim for mine whatsoever, other than to make people smile and connect. But with yours, babe, honestly, you are raising conversations that ultimately are almost like what a PhD might be. Because realistically, these academic institutes, you do a master's, you do a PhD, and you research, and part of that, all that research is you read some books with like theoretical stuff, and half of it was probably a lot quite wrong, but it was, relative at the time. And then you go and do workshops, and you ask the present people in society what their thoughts are. How many comments did your last post have with people?
No idea.
Yeah, hundreds.
Loads, yeah.
So it's almost like, for me, I feel like we really need to steer, academic institutes, should we say, should maybe like
tap into it more, There are people. There's an incredible team. I think they're based at Manchester Uni, who are doing some great things and talking about the parent experience, the hearing.
And
parent.
have they contacted you? And that's great.
Yeah,
I like that.
And there's a global. I don't know what you would call it. There's a conference that happens every 2 years where kind of people in the deaf education, raising a deaf child field, they all come together and discuss how. And, the barriers and how you overcome those barriers. So these things are happening. But again...
Have you been asked to talk at one of those?
No. A friend did. Maybe one day. We'll see.
I think you're going to.
But the people
a lot of my guests, because obviously I'm new to this, but sometimes the guests, they sit there shaking, and I can be really nervous sometimes talking, but you're a natural, babe. Honestly.
Thank you.
You really are a natural.
It's not something I enjoy, but...
Well, you're very sincere, and you have, a brilliant way of getting across really important things. So I really hope that you do go to these conferences.
Thank you. I mean, to be honest, it felt like a privilege just being there. And there were other parents that spoke at that conference last year who, I mean, they are incredible in their own right as well. They just don't necessarily put it out on social media in the same way that I do. And, their focus is a slightly different one from mine. So I remember one of there's two women I'm thinking of, one of them said, parent leadership is the hill I'll die on, she said. And I was like, BSL is a hill I'll die on. And I thought then and there, there's this army of parents who all have a slightly different focus, a slightly different passion. And together that can make a massive impact. So I hope that they, those other parents kind of are aware of how amazing they are, and how much they've taught me as well. This woman, her children are in their teenage years now, and I've learned loads from her. So yes, I've got this platform, and I talk, and I know I'm not bad with words, but there are so many others out there too who are just incredible powerhouse, usually women, which I love, who are, making real waves in their own fields with, parent access or, research. They're there. But again, like we were talking about with deaf, high achieving deaf adults, that they're not as visible.
Yeah. It's like, unfortunately, the loudest voice gets, that validation, whereas you're not saying anything new and I really try to be mindful of the fact that if I do get a post or a video that, because I've tagged someone I know that might be famous or, and it's done really well, that I'm not saying anything different that hasn't been said massively from people that just don't get the recognition or hasn't got the loudest voice.
Yeah.
So when it comes to advocating, that's definitely something that I've had to learn, is like not being this, I'm going to sort it out, don't you worry, advocate, but being no, this is your battle and I'm going to support you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, as someone who's massively codependent and needs to fix everything and make everything better, I've had to learn to be, okay, take a step back and know when to speak. And if I do get a moment where everyone's paying attention to something I say, I might direct them to someone who else has said it but just doesn't have that particular attention at the time. So that's something that I've learned, and I think is important when you're talking about advocacy. It's not just about speaking about the things that are right, it's also about speaking or speaking for the people that are struggling, but kind of...
It's putting the spotlight on the people that need the spotlight.
Yeah.
It's being an ally, isn't it?
Yeah. But this podcast is... And people have always tried to put me in this box whenever I do anything as, oh, she does this for the deaf community and she does that for the deaf community. No. I'm just me, and I'm conversating. That's why if I did a podcast about sign language and interpreting and this kind of content all the time, I know that it would be massive, because you're aware people are hungry for that type of conversation. But I'm like, no, I need to talk about my mothering journey, and I want to bring the vulnerability of mothers to the surface a little bit more and allow conversation to like enhance that journey.
I think that's great.
But your presence and journey with what you're doing is amazing, and Ada is I was so like, I wish I could have spent more time with her, honestly.
I know.
She's just such an absolute bright little... She was just all that... And she was like, Mum, come on, going out.
Yeah, I know.
I remember taking my little girls to the Snow Dome.
Do you?
Yeah.
No, it was the first time I've ever been, actually.
Was it good?
It was really good. It was... I wish we'd prepped her a little bit better. But we didn't... See, this is the thing as well. I'm still learning about how to make sure Ada's getting full access. So when we got there, she was quite overwhelmed with what was around. That she was just going she was running backwards and forwards, and then she wanted to go on the ice rink, but that wasn't part of the experience, but we didn't know that, and all of these kind of little things that I wish, actually, when I'd emailed the Snow Dome to say, please can you book an interpreter, also I should have said, can you send me some pictures, a step-by-step guide of what's going to happen, so that I can show her beforehand. Now sometimes I do that, and other times I don't, but it's making sure that I know the right time and the right place to ask the right questions, and working out, even how to get a big company like the Snow Dome to book an interpreter, because I know from past experience, if you just say to them, oh, we're coming on this date, and we'd love it if you could provide some access, they won't do that. You have to go in hard and say, right, you need to book one, here's how, because they don't know how.
Really?
So I now know, I've got like a standard email now that I send, and I said, right, this is the situation, this is why she needs an interpreter, this is why you should, and here's how you do it. It's not always the first email, but it's definitely the second one that goes out every time, because it stops people trying to get out of it, and it answers questions that they're invariably going to ask later down the line anyway, so it saves time. But all of that's been learnt. I didn't know that I would need that awareness, or that it's not really a skill, but
yeah. So do you think there's need for information for parents? Because I suppose my last question to you is going to be, what advice can you give? And I know, because your kids are very young, and you're still in your finding your way journey, and this is why I want you to meet Andy, because I said to him, please put this down in a resource, because I bet so many people would pay for that kind of advice. What is it that you feel or you wish up until now? You're how long down the line
6
are
years.
you? You're 6 years down the line. What is it that you wish you knew, and what advice would you give to mums and dads?
that you can.
So you would just encourage that you can be in this. Just
Push, and like, it's in you. You're a parent. Like, it's part and parcel of being a parent, is that you fight for your child. It is possible to ask the difficult questions with the professionals. It might not be easy, but you can learn sign language. Again, it might not be easy, there are barriers in the way, but it is possible. All these things are available. You, little old you, can. And it's just about having confidence in your ability to find what you need to find, I think, and to push when you need to push, and to tap into your own resourcefulness that will be there. It's just you might not know it. I certainly didn't. It's something that I've found. Confidence and, awareness of resources, all of that. As it stands, it's not readily available. You have to be the one to go and find it, but you can. It's daunting, it's scary, but you can.
Yeah. I think I read one of your posts as well, and you said beautifully, and you highlighted, I'm doing all this, but I am massively privileged in the fact that I have support, family, husband.
Oh, yeah.
Financial. And I think that really needs to be, that message needs to be sent home, that it really is up to government and policies to just make changes so that parents can stop feeling inadequate in these scenarios that they find themselves in. And it's not a scenario, it's just part of life. It's part of life, the wonderful life of raising a deaf child.
Yeah, but there are so many, barriers. We talk about the privileged position that I'm in. So many barriers that I don't think the government would even consider half the time. As an example, a lot of parents of deaf children are already learning English as their second language, and then have to try and take on BSL on top of that. A lot of deaf children I know have parents who have migrated, so they're already a bilingual household, struggling with that, struggling to access resources because society isn't equitable. Then add in trying to access everything that I've had to fight tooth and nail for. It's insane when you think about that. And who is the one that suffers? It's the deaf child.
And then they're going to just accumulate other problems down the line. So it's about preventative measures, really.
Absolutely.
Like you think, 2 languages, 3 languages, really hard. But even harder if it doesn't get addressed early on. And community really is a massive contribution to solving things like that.
Not waiting for things to go wrong. I think that's what happens now, especially when you look at the education field. Children are put in mainstream and they wait until as long as they're coping, then that's acceptable.
Where does Ada go, and what's
Ada's in a full deaf education environment. She's in a school for deaf children. So she went to a mainstream nursery, but we knew quite quickly into her time in nursery that we wanted her to go to deaf school. And that was quite straightforward for us, because she didn't speak. So it's this weird kind of benefit of ignorance from the government, in a way, that because they view Ada's situation as this terrible situation, they then didn't quibble that a deaf school was right for her. But so many parents would have to fight tooth and nail to get into. You have to actually prove that mainstream can't meet a need in order to get into a deaf school. And
because they're closing a lot of them, aren't they?
Yeah, so the government will always try and mainstream because it's cheaper. So we were lucky that we didn't have that battle, but this is a battle that a lot of families do have. And I've got a friend whose son was an emotional wreck for well over a year because school was so inaccessible for him, and his time in school was getting less and less and less. He couldn't do full days
because of this social element
because he couldn't access the environment, because it was stressful, because and on paper he was thriving as far as like the government were concerned. He's a bright boy. He was doing well academically. He was coping, quote unquote coping. But actually what his mum was seeing was a shell of the son that she knew. So she is also full on mum lion and got him where he needed to be, which happens to be the school that Ada's at now, which is lovely. And he's changed almost overnight from being in full community and the full environment that he needs, and he's back to the son that that she knew was in there all along. But it's a fight. It's always a fight. And
so you speak to many parents that have to travel,
like An hour and a half at least is standard, yeah.
Well done for being an inadequate mother and coming and talking to me so vulnerably and openly, and just allowing that, your journey and experience, to give insight into this. I don't know what to call it, because it's just another layer of parenting, isn't it? We all need to know about, so that we can all connect, we can all understand each other, and we can all help one another. And if only the government would just maybe do that a little bit more and understand things a little bit more.
Yeah, that would go a long way, I think.
What are your hopes for the future in terms of what you're doing now, before we finish? And thank you so much for coming on here, but what is it you're hoping to, achieve, maybe with your campaigning, your advocacy, just Tilly? What is it we
what I would love to
see
see? What I would love to see is sign language valued nationwide, not just in the deaf community, but nationally, globally, as a language equal to spoken language. Yes, it's legally recognised, but that's nowhere near recognising it and valuing it as equal. And I think when that happens, that's when access comes in. And I would love to see, in 10 years' time, when my daughter is starting to think about university, her not to have to think about compromising on what she can and can't do because of access. So that's what I would love to see.
Yeah. I would love to see me out of a job.
Yeah.
I would love to see, and I never thought I'd say it because I've got bills to pay, and I don't know if I'm going to see it in my lifetime, but I would love to see me out of a job. I would love to see that sign language does get eventually put into schools as a GCSE. There is a massive problem in terms of not having enough deaf teachers. They were all made redundant. So, there's problems there, and the government needs to put their money where their mouth is and say, what are they going to do about it?
Yeah. I'm glad they've paused it with the GCSE.
Yeah, they've made it, but whether it gets used. When there wasn't enough nurses, they made an incentive. When the PFA realised that it's all been run by white men, they gave out governance qualifications to all the ex-black players. It's not hard to solve.
No.
We can get deaf teachers. Yeah. We can make this happen. They just need to wake up a little bit.
Yeah, and I think also acknowledge that GCSE is nowhere near enough. That's putting a bandage on the problem, really. I mean, primary schools, I think, is where the focus should be. Start teaching children right from the word go, and then when they reach GCSE level, they could be flourishing with BSL rather than just doing your basic kind of, colours and numbers. They'd already have that embedded, and then children like Ada would be able to communicate with the hearing world right from when they're babies, rather than having to wait until they're 16 and come across someone who happens to have chosen the GCSE. It's great. I'm not saying don't do the GCSE, but I'd love to see, and this is again valuing the language as equal to spoken language. Teach BSL at the same, French is taught from what age, like 7? I'm sure my older daughter's learning a bit of it at school.
I think you go into senior school and you start learning a language, yeah.
I remember being taught French in first school.
Some good schools.
Yeah, it's not standard, is it? But yeah, it can be. It can be there.
Yeah, some good schools maybe.
I'd love to see that level of access, that level of valuing the language as something that just should be
and also
universal.
That, as a dyslexic person, and I as a dyslexic person, I've tried to get this across in order to bring value to the language in a hearing world and say, it has helped me as a dyslexic, but I could not learn French. I could not learn German. But I've learnt sign language like that, and I'm good at it because I'm dyslexic. So if you've got all these dyslexic kids, then why wouldn't you have a language that is visual? We know a lot about dyslexia. Why wouldn't you try and bring this language in? And I got approached, I was interpreting it at church, and this wonderful lady came over and she said, my family's a family of languages. We all speak 5 languages. And immediately I just thought, wow. Like, imagining your household. And she said, but I have a dyslexic daughter, and we're a bit concerned because she's getting left behind, kind of thing. She's a bit left out. And we thought about her maybe learning sign language. So I was like, yes, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about how it is of value to
Well, that's
us.
being acknowledged, isn't it? With all these baby sign language courses, everyone's saying, oh, teach your baby sign language and it will help them learn spoken language. And I've got a friend who has been teaching her baby some sign language, and she was signing before she was speaking. Why not just continue that? Why not acknowledge that this is a language that has benefit, not just with babies, but all the way through life? It's a weird kind of segregation that people are doing, saying, oh yes, let's give it to babies and then let's give it to 16-year-olds. Why are we not making those links?
Well, you hear it daily. I hear it daily. I've always wanted to learn sign language.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so drawn to sign language. Oh, I can't stop watching you. There's a reason for that. And the reason is we were all signing before we spoke.
Yeah.
We were all created to use our hands, our faces, our body. It's in us. We were meant to do it. It's only because of British culture. Don't give anything away. Keep everything to that it's almost been took out of us. And I think when we start having those conversations, then we'll actually wake up a little bit and really try and get this language the value it deserves.
Yeah. It's got to be made accessible, hasn't it? All these people want to learn, but ask someone with no link to the deaf community to shell out thousands of pounds. They can't do it.
It's money.
It is.
So thank you so much, hun. This was probably one of my favourite podcasts.
It's been really fun.
Yeah, like this conversation was epic.
Thanks for having me.
Don't forget to subscribe. Where can we ask you these questions? On Instagram, and it's called
Learning Ada's Language.
Learning Ada's Language. My Instagram, Hayley Brown and Co. Subscribe to this channel on YouTube, where hopefully I've done a good enough job translating it into BSL. And Spotify, Apple Pod, go subscribe, do all that jazz, and I'll meet you again, Dilly. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.